Hi, I'm Aprajita Jain. Welcome to Art Insider. Today we speak about video, a medium that constantly confounds its viewers and challenges its artists to think differently. Our first artist on the show today is Asim Waqif, a trained architect who's been practicing art for the last 6 years and channels his investigations into sculpture, performance art and video. I met with him recently to discuss video with him. Hi Asim, welcome to Art Insider. So you're a trained architect, but you've been practicing art for over 6 years now. A lot of your practice is sculpture, performance, and equally video. Can you tell us a little bit about video in your practice?
Well, usually I've been using video as a peripheral mechanism to talk about things that the actual installation or sculpture is not able to talk of. So I think it's a very interesting device. I don't use video so much for documentation, although I've used it a little bit for documentation. But because when I create a video of a particular space or an object, I'm deciding the viewpoint of how the viewer is going to access it. So in that sense, I'm able to control a certain story and give a certain perspective of the object. So I find video quite interesting.
Can you tell us about one of my favorite videos, which is Tark? And I think you've collaborated with a performance artist or a dancer and in a really dilapidated building.
It was quite impromptu, the whole process. I had applied for a project done by Gati, which was a collaboration, which was supposed to be a collaboration between a filmmaker and a performer to create a film about performance. So I applied as a filmmaker for that project. And Gati, there were a lot of other people who also applied, and Gati somehow teamed me up with this dancer, Rakesh. And Rakesh was quite new to Delhi. So initially I took him to different spaces I found interesting in Delhi. And somehow we found this particular building had a lot of energy. And also Rakesh himself, the way he performs is full of energy, and there's a lot of almost angst in the way he performs. And the architecture of the building also, and actually the state of the building right now, because it went through.
Can you tell us about the building, which building you finally chose?
This building is one of the buildings that was broken down in the Ceiling Drive in the mid 2000s in Delhi. So it was going to be built as a mall, but technical designation of that land was for agricultural use. So after a series of public interest litigations, the Supreme Court actually forced the government of Delhi to seal these buildings. So what they thought is that if they put a lock and seal it with wax, that somebody will use the back door. So actually the government brutalized the building to break it down, to make it unsafe so that nobody would dare to go in and use it. And that is a sort of a urban planning mechanism that the state is using, which I find quite horrific actually. But because of that building being left alone for so many years and nobody really daring to go in, it had really interesting things that had come about, like there were rooms full of dust swirls because of the traffic moving outside and certain wind patterns. There were different dust patterns that had formed inside. So Rakesh and I, we tried to use the building as much as possible in the way we filmed the whole thing. And our process was not very planned. We would go there, we went there about over I think a week or 10 days, and every day we would choreograph between the movement of the dancer and the movement of the camera in that particular space. And so we tried a lot of impromptu shooting methods, and actually the whole project took I think maybe 3 or 4 weeks from me meeting Rakesh for the first time till the finishing of the edit.
So in Tark, there's very powerful music and there's very good editing. How much of your video is premeditated and how much comes out as spontaneous?
Yeah, it depends on the project actually. But even in my sculpture and installation, the process I try to follow, I prefer not to have a premeditated sort of image of what it will look like, because that allows me to experiment and play with the medium while I'm executing things. That's actually one of the main reasons I moved away from architectural practice and design practice, because I felt that that practice, at least the way it is done usually, is really based in studios and control environments where these drawings are created, and then they're supposed to be executed by tender and contract on site. But I feel that there's a lot of innovation possible while we are making things. So usually my process is very impromptu and instinctive.
Given that I'm interviewing you for a TV series, what are your thoughts about how differently we could interview artists for video?
Well, there are a lot of methods of shooting or even post-production that could be used. But I think right now the primary issue actually is with television as an institution. It has become subservient to profit making. So even if you're trying to give out some information or news, the television industry is sensationalizing it and making it larger than life to be able to sell it. So in that situation, I think it's very difficult to be very innovative in television. Right now, most television formats are following formulas, already successful formulas, or very systemic things. So actually, it's a very difficult space to innovate in, I think, today.
Thank you very much, Asim.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Our next artist is Jitish Kalat, someone who constantly ignores boundaries within established mediums. We met with him in Bombay to see his dramatic installation, which includes video called Covering Letter.
Did this piece start this series of working with found texts?
So I think this would be, in fact, the most recent of the works where a historical text or utterance becomes the sort of central pivot of the artwork. The first one was Public Notice from 2003, which had Nehru's speech delivered at the midnight of Indian independence, rendered as a charred letter, almost like a cremated alphabet. Public Notice 2 was Gandhi's speech from the moment of his inaugurating the Salt March with a call for total non-cooperation and total non-violence in one single persuasive call.
And that's the one with the text made out of bones.
That's right. So that takes almost the form of a fossil
Hundreds
relic.
of bones spelling out the text.
And the third iteration really was the third piece in this sort of trilogy was Public Notice 3, a speech delivered on September 11th, but 1893, which happened to be the first Parliament of Religions, which happened in Chicago in the very building where the Museum of the Art Institute stands today. So in fact, the auditorium.
And that was the speech by
Vivekananda. And it's the same date, but also the same site. So it's 9/11, delivered in the auditorium of the World Parliament of Religions, which today is the grand staircase of the Museum of the Art Institute. So essentially where the artwork was read was also where the voice of Vivekananda was heard.
And so this work is made from a letter that Gandhi had written to Hitler in what year?
This was in 1939.
1939. So the war has really, the Nazi horrors are just beginning. And
Just beginning the, the invasion of Poland, the outburst of the Second World War is 5 weeks away. India is, of course, in the midst of her own struggle for independence, but equally the letter is delivered right from the middle of what one might describe as the center of the map of India from Wardha, where Gandhi had his ashram at that point in time.
And do they know if Hitler ever received the letter?
That's still a matter of speculation. But for me, I think the letter almost seems like an open letter. It feels like a letter, like a lot of Gandhian gestures, to travel beyond the intended recipient and the delivery date, as if it could be to anyone, anytime, anywhere, and repurposed across time and space and context to maybe rethink the world.
Contemporary art as a space of frustration for a lot of people. They say, we don't understand it, what is this stuff? And now with a museum such as this, which is a museum of antiquities and the traditional, and now they're inserting contemporary art into it. And a piece such as this, which is quite experimental, rather radical sort of piece, I know it's going to get the sort of criticism where people would say, oh, this doesn't belong here. This is a Western idiom, this is a Western idea, and an Indian artist shouldn't be doing this type of thing. What would you say to that sort of criticism?
Well, my first response to a view like that was to say, with real sympathy, that it comes out of a perspective that really needs a profound and sympathetic educational structure. That these easy dichotomies between what is Western and what is not Western are belied if you go to Ajanta and you see those cave drawings where there are citations from colors from Turkey, shapes from China, so that India has had a very profound, non-elite cosmopolitan tradition that goes a long way. So there must be a great dearth of art and cultural education in this country, in its institutions, for such views to have any kind of dominance.
To show that
I think that is a real problem. And I think art education and humanistic education in this country has been so devalued in in emphasizing new technology, finance, economy, that I think that's the first thing I would say. Rather than condemning the view, I would try to understand what the conditions are that produce such a view.
I see. So then perhaps, as Jitish was saying, a museum such as this, where you would not expect to encounter contemporary, is maybe the most appropriate place for it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are many appropriate places. But as I said, to make an installation of this kind in a traditional historical museum is to make an intervention. The question is, you do need the kind of outreach. You do need the resources for the outreach. You need the writers who can make that translation, who can help people to make the translation. I think people are hugely excited by encountering new things, things that are challenging. But they have to be helped. That has to happen in a context. And I think that
I often say, if I go into a chemistry lab, I have no idea what's going on.
You have to have somebody who translates that.
It's a specialized language, and we have to know this. Wonderful.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
It's time for a break, but do stay tuned in to learn more about video.